Okay, welcome back to your final video lesson of the week. Well done for all of your hard work as always. We have a bit to get through today, so let's get straight into it. Can you please copy down the title, the date, and the learning objective? Pause the video and do that now, please. Okay, if you're back, that means you're ready to complete the do now. Please answer these 5 questions in full sentences based on the prologue. Okay, if you're back, let's make some corrections with your purple pen. Make sure that you do write the correct answer so the do now can form some really great revision notes for you. Pause the video, check your work, and make any corrections that you need to. All right, so like you saw from the do now, we are going to read part of Act 1, Scene 1. We're going to chunk it into 2 sections. So you're going to read the red section today, and on Tuesday next week, you're going to read the final part of Act 1, Scene 1, which is based on this black section. So let's read our summary. The scene and the play really opens with a brawl on the streets of Verona between a couple of servants from both the household of the Montagues and the Capulets, and we know already that they are at the root of the kind of conflict in the text. The fight between the servants escalates quite quickly as citizens become involved and also other members of the households. The brawl comes to an end when Lord Capulet and Lord Montague arrive, and the prince joins, and he puts a stop to the riot in his monologue, which we are going to look at later. We're going to read this section of the summary next week, but I just thought it was important to make it very, very clear to you that we're splitting the act into Act 1, Scene 1, into 2 sections. Before we do get into reading the text, I would like you to answer the following question in no more than 3 sentences. Why do you think it's significant that Shakespeare opened the play with the servants being involved in an argument? Pause the video and answer that question now for me, please. Okay, so as we read through the text today, you're going to complete one of these, which is called a thinking map. So if you are working on the computer, you need to open a brand new Word document and create something like this. If you are working in a notebook or an exercise book, you need to turn to a brand new clean page and copy this thinking map down, including the subheadings. Pause the video and make sure that this is on an A4 brand new clean page, please. All right, so as we read the beginning of Act 1, Scene 1, you're going to complete this thinking map by writing your ideas about the different subheadings in the thinking map. You can write down keywords and phrases from the text itself, or you can summarize ideas that I'm going to talk about verbally. There's also going to be little purple annotations that pop up on the screen that are important, and you might want to jot those down with the corresponding quotes or ideas. So let's get straight into it. So the text begins with Samson and Gregory entering with swords and bucklers. Samson and Gregory are the Capulet servants, so Juliet's family's servants, and they enter with swords and bucklers. Bucklers are kind of small shields. So as this is the first thing that we see as an audience, it kind of establishes how conflict and violence are going to pervade the play, be a very key theme throughout. So Samson begins by saying, "Gregory, on my word, will not carry coals. No, for then we should be colliers. I mean, and we be in collar, will draw. Ay, while you live, draw your neck, out of collar. So let's just unpick this before we move on. Will not carry coals is Samson's way of saying we are not going to be insulted. We're not going to submit to insult from the Montagues. We're not going to be humiliated. And Gregory says, if we do, we would be colliers, we would be cowards. And then Samson says, to clarify, no, what I mean is that if they make us angry, we're going to pull out our swords, we're going to draw our swords. And Gregory says, while you live, draw your neck out of collar. He says, maybe you should focus on making sure that you don't get into trouble, Samson. Samson continues by saying, I strike quickly being moved, but thou art not quickly moved to strike. A dog of the house of Montague moves me. To move is to stir, and to be valiant is to stand. Therefore, if thou art moved, thou runnest away. So, let's unpick this in a little bit more detail. Referring to the Montagues as dogs, that reference shows the hatred towards the Montagues. I'm probably going to shorthand Montagues with M's and Capulets will be C's. Here, Samson says, I fight hard when I'm angry. Being moved means to be angry. And Gregory said, but it's quite hard to make you angry. And Gregory says, to move is to stir. So to be angry is to run away, but to be brave is to stand and fight. So if you're moved, if you're angry, you're going to run away. It seems like Gregory's just kind of teasing Samson here, having a little bit of fun. Samson continues, he repeats the insult, calling them a dog. A dog of that house shall move me to stand. I will take the wall of any man or maid of Montagues. He says that if he passes anyone on the street that is from the Montagues family, he said that he will stand closer to the wall, and that would cause them to kind of walk in the gutter. So by standing closer to the wall and making the Montagues walk into the gutter, Samson wants to establish some kind of superiority over the Montagues. Gregory says that shows thee a weak slave, for the weakest go to the wall. Again, teasing Samson's bravery. Samson says, 'tis true, and therefore women, being the weaker vessels, are ever thrust to the wall. Therefore I will push Montague's men from the wall and thrust his maids to the wall. So he says, actually, you're right, I'll push the Montague men into the street and the Montague women up against the wall. And this line from Samson kind of introduces, the Elizabethan gender bias that women are the weaker vessels. And it's also worth noting, before we move on, in Samson and Gregory's communication with each other, there's a lot of pun, a lot of wordplay, a lot of kind of clownish behaviour, and this shows that they are archetypal, so typical servants. They kind of fit in to our stereotype of the lower class, kind of clowning around, foolish, uneducated servants. Gregory continues by saying, the quarrel is between our masters and us, their men. It's a very important line here because it's establishing that even though the fight is between their masters, it has kind of trickled down into the servants. 'Tis all one, I will show myself a tyrant. When I have fought with the men, I'll be civil with the maids. I will cut off their heads. The heads of the maids? Aye, the heads of the maids, or their maiden heads. Take it in what sense thou wilt. Again, we have a little bit of wordplay here. Samson's saying that he will be a harsh master, and after he fights the men, he's actually going to cut off the heads of the maids. And then he clarifies after that, She says, yes, the heads of the maids cut off their heads, or take their maiden heads, which is a reference to taking a woman's virginity. So again, there is wordplay here between the servants. Gregory says, they must take it in sense that feel it. Samson says, me they shall feel while I am able to stand, and 'tis known I am a pretty piece of flesh. Gregory says, 'tis well thou art not fish. If thou hadst been poor John. Draw thy tool, here comes of the house of Montagues. So he says, Gregory says here, again, kind of winding Samson up, says, it's a good thing you're not a piece of fish, because if you were, you'd be a bit dried and a bit shriveled, he says. So again, these are kind of really violent references to describe sexual activity with women, which reflects their class as servants. And again, reinforces the Elizabethan gender bias against women. So then we enter two other servants, one being Abram. The spelling of this character differs between texts, so don't worry about that if you're looking at anything else and get a bit confused. And Abram is a servant of the Montague family, which is the family of Romeo. Samson continues again with some innuendos, and he says, my naked weapon is out, quarrel, I will back thee. He says, draw your swords, let's fight, I'll back you up. Gregory says, how turn thy back and run. He says, how will you back me up? Are you going to turn around and run away like a wimp? Samson says, fear me not. He says, no, marry, I fear thee. Let us take the law of our sides, let them begin. I will frown as I pass by, and let them take it as they list. So Samson kind of says here, just chill for a second. Let's not break the law by starting a fight. Let them start it first. And then Gregory says, I will frown at them as they pass by and hope that that will make them fight. Samson says, nay, as they dare, I will bite my thumb at them, which is a disgrace to them if they bear it. He says, by biting his thumb, that is an insult, and if they let him get away with biting his thumb, they'll be dishonoured. Biting the thumb is kind of akin to putting your middle finger up at someone in modern day. And it's also an insult which kind of emasculates men. To emasculate a man is to kind of take away their manhood and what makes them feel masculine. And by biting his thumb at the Montague servants, he is making them appear cowardly if they do not react. Obviously, Abram, in typical fashion, reacts and he says, do you bite your thumb at us, sir? Samson says, I do bite my thumb, sir. Abram repeats, do you bite your thumb at us, sir? And then aside to Gregory. Remember, an aside means that only the audience can hear it and whoever's being spoken to. He says, the law of our side if I say I. He says, will the law protect us if I say yes? And Gregory says, no. And then Samson replies to Abram by saying, no, sir, I do not bite my thumb at you, sir, but I do bite my thumb. So there is a lot of sirs in this dialogue here, and it's up for interpretation. Are they being polite? Are they trying not to get in trouble with the law and trying to potentially avoid a conflict? Or are they being sarcastic and actually doing the opposite and trying to instigate a response from one another? At this point, Gregory says, do you quarrel, sir? Which basically means, are you trying to have a fight? Abram says, start a fight? Quarrel, sir? No, sir. Samson says, but if you do, sir, I am for you. I serve as good a man as you. He says, if you do want to fight, I'm your man. My employer, the head of my household, is as good as yours. And Abram says, no better. Samson says, well, sir. So at this point, they're arguing over the leadership of both the Montague and Capulet families, whom they both serve. which kind of shows the depth of the family feud. Like I said, it's trickled down into the servants who are willing to fight and break the law to serve their good men. And then Benvolio enters. Now, Benvolio is a member of Romeo,'s family. He is, in fact, Romeo's cousin. And Benvolio is kind of categorized as a good character, a moral character. And we'll see that unfold in a second. Gregory again says aside to Samson, "Say better, here comes one of my master's kinsmen." So he says to Samson, say that your man, say that your head of the family is better, because here comes one of my employer's relatives in the shape of Benvolio. And Samson says again, "Yes, better, sir." And Abraham says, "No, you lie." Samson says, "Draw if you be men. Gregory, remember thy washing blow." He said, "If you're a man, you'll draw your swords." And then he kind of boosts Gregory up by saying, "Remember how to slash, remember how to use your sword." And at this point, we see a lot of kind of male bravado, and that means that they have this kind of boldness in order to intimidate and impress one another. And then at this point, they fight. And Benvolio jumps in. He says, "Part, fools, put up your swords. You know not what you do." And he uses his sword to beat down their swords. He's asking them to put their swords away. And he says, "You don't know what you're doing. You know not what you do." And this line here, "you know not what you do," is a direct echo of Jesus' words when he was being crucified, where he says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." So it kind of establishes Benvolio as this almost kind of morally holy and benevolent and good character. And then Tybalt enters. Now, Tybalt is the antagonist of the text, which means he is the kind of in opposition to the protagonist, who is Romeo. So Tybalt is a Capulet, and him and Romeo are going to be at odds throughout the text. He's also completely juxtaposed to Benvolio. We have a good character, and then we have quite a violent, chaotic character. And Tybalt establishes that straight away by saying, "What, art thou drawn among these heartless hinds? Turn thee, Benvolio, look upon thy death." He says, "Why have you pulled out your swords to fight these worthless servants?" And he says, "Benvolio, instead you need to turn around and you need to look at me, because I'm going to kill you." Now, heartless hinds is quite an interesting piece of wordplay here, and it's used to emasculate Benvolio and the other men. So, a hind is a female deer, I believe, and heartless has two meanings. So, one of the meanings of heartless is that you have no heart, and another meaning of heartless, which is where the wordplay comes in, is that if you were to spell heart like this, that is a reference to kind of a male, a deer, a stag. So by calling them heartless hinds, he's basically calling them non-masculine men. Again, in order to emasculate them, to make them feel cowardly. Benvolio says, "I do but keep the peace, put up thy sword, or manage it to part these men with me." He says, "Chill, Tybalt, I'm only trying to keep the peace. Either put away your short sword, or at least use it to help me stop the servants from fighting." And Tybalt says, "What? Drawn and talk of peace? I hate the word, as I hate hell. All Montagues and thee, have it thee, coward." He says, "Why on earth would you take out your sword but want to talk about peace?" He says, "I hate the word peace as much as I hate hell, the Montagues, and you, Benvolio." And then he says, "Let's fight." So Tybalt's words here show the kind of deep and passionate contempt that he has for the Montagues. And now we're going to skip a little bit. So at this point, you are more than welcome to pause and go back and add any notes to your thinking map that you've been adding to throughout the reading. Hopefully you have some really excellent notes. I'm excited to see these. If not, we can move on to this section of the scene. So we have actually skipped a tiny little part where the citizens kind of get involved and they kind of G up the men that are fighting. And then Lady Capulet and Lady Montague and Montague kind of come in and they have a little bit of an argument. After that, the prince arrives and he delivers this, which is a monologue. And a monologue is an extended piece, an extended speech on stage by one character. And a monologue is instantly going to show a character's dominance. This monologue is also in iambic pentameter, so again, each line having those 10 syllables. And again, that kind of asserts how kind of self-assured and confident he is to be speaking in this metric of iambic pentameter. Okay, let's start reading. Rebellious subjects, enemies to peace, profaners of this neighbour stained still. Will they not hear? What ho, you men, you beasts! So at this point, he's shouting at them, going, "You rebels, you're enemies of the peace, and you're men who turn their weapons against their own neighbours." And then he's getting quite frustrated here because they're not listening. So he raises his voice and calls them beasts. By referring to them as beasts, he's kind of clarifying their kind of barbaric and animalistic instinct to continuously engage in violence in order to assert kind of dominance or power. And then he says, "The quench the fire of your pernicious rage with purple fountains issuing from your veins." He says, you satisfy your anger with fountains of each other's blood. So as one would drink water to satisfy thirst, they quench their rage with the blood that issues from their veins, which is a quite a vivid description and a vivid image there. He continues by saying, "On pain of torture from those bloody hands, throw your mistempered weapons to the ground and hear the sentence of your moved prince." He says, "I'll have you tortured if you don't put down your swords and listen to your moved prince," which again means your angry prince. And it's important to notice at this stage that there is a kind of repetition of imagery related to blood and weapons, mistempered weapons, bloody hands, purple fountains, pernicious rage, stained steel. I'll just highlight some of those for you so you can jot those down if you would like to in your thinking map. And then he continues on to say, "3 civil brawls, bred of any airy word, by thee, old Capulet and Montague, have thrice disturbed the quiet of our streets, and made Verona ancient citizens." He's talking about how many times the feud between the Capulets and the Montagues have disturbed the streets in Verona, so kind of giving us a bit of kind of historical context to the feud. And I don't know what that's come up now, but like I said, it's a vivid description of their rage. He continues and said, "And you've made Verona's ancient citizens cast by their grave, beseeming ornaments to wield old partisans in hands as old, cankered with peace to part your cankered hate." He said that even Verona's old citizens have had to take off their beseeming ornaments, their kind of old, their dress clothes, to wield their weapons in hands as old, cankered with peace to part your cankered hate. So here there is the idea that the feud between the Montagues and Capulets has had a huge impact on Verona, as well as the reputation of the family. The feud has been going on for so long that the weapons are rusted, and the family's reputation is also rusted. He says, "If you ever disturb our streets again, your lives shall pay the forfeit of the peace. For this time all the rest depart away. You, Capulet, shall go along with me, and Montague come you this afternoon." So he sends everyone away, and he speaks to the heads of the family directly, as they are the most powerful men. He says, "To know our farther pleasure in this case, to old Three Town our common judgment place. Once more on pain of death all men depart." He says, "This afternoon I'm going to take you to the Free Town, which is where he will kind of deliver his judgments and tell the families what they want, what he wants them to do and how he wants them to behave." And then he says to everybody else on stage, "Leave or be put to death." So it kind of again establishes the prince's control as he kind of issues out these demands. So at this stage, you should have been making notes in your thinking map. If you need to kind of go back into the video and add anything additional, please feel free to spend some time doing that now. If not, we can move on to the final task. So this is an excerpt from some information about kind of masculinity in the play. The origin of the brawl, rife as it is with sexual and physical boldness, introduces the important theme of masculine honour. Masculine honour does not function in the play as some sort of indifference to pain or insult. In Verona, a man must defend his honour and his masculinity whenever it is transgressed against, whether verbally or physically. This concept of masculine honour exists through every layer of society in Verona, from the servants on up to the nobleman. It animates Samson and Gregory as much as it does Tybalt. So this idea of masculine honour and showing one's masculinity and defending one's masculinity pervades the entire text, from the lower status to the most noble men. That's what we see in this scene. So the final task for today, I would like you to answer these questions, which are based on this information here, and then add that to the male stereotypes notes in your thinking map. Pause the video and complete this task now, please. Okay, if you're back, that means that you are ready to submit your work. Please make sure that whether it is a Word document or whether it is a piece of written work, that you submit both to me via email. I am really looking forward to seeing your thinking maps and seeing how much detail that you've put into them. I hope you enjoyed today's lesson, and I will see you in the next one.